last name starts with an L, and I actually can't remember it. It's been 9 years. In a previous election, there's videotape of the hanging chads that would come in. How'd they deal with the hanging chads then in Miami-Dade County? And I've seen this videotape. I don't think it could be reconstructed anyway. They had 70 volunteers from the League of Women Voters. Now, they haven't been on my side very much. They really don't seem to be very bipartisan to me. Long tables, 70 volunteers from the League of Women Voters. They were set down at a table, and they would bring in these punch card ballots and set them on one side of each of the ladies that were there working, issue them 2 or 3 nice, sharp number 2 lead pencils, like you take your Iowa Basic Skills with, where I come from, and they would pick up these hanging chad ballots, these punch card ballots, and clean them up. If any chad is hanging and it's still dangling there, they'd punch the pencil through the hole, rake it off, and stack these cleaned up ballots over on this other side, where once they got done cleaning up the hanging chads, these 70 volunteers for the League of Women Voters, then the processed ballots would go through the vote counting machine. Now, does that give you a lot of confidence if you put somebody there at a table to decide your vote for you by where they poke the pencil and which chad's hanging? Not me, it doesn't. That process should have never happened. The Collier brothers did investigative research on election fraud down in Florida. Neither one of these gentlemen are alive today, and I don't have any sign of foul play, and I don't allege such a thing. I just haven't been able to track what brought about their demise. But I've read a fair amount of their material, and they did a video, a movie, an investigative journalism, where they went into the previous election board director of Miami-Dade County who took care of the voting machines, sitting in a warehouse out along the edge of the swamp. And they walked in and said, "What do you do?" "Well, I fix these vote counting machines, and I keep them up in shape." And he said, "Well, how do you make this all work?" And they got to talking about how elections got rigged, and he said, "Here's how it is," and the video exists. He pulled some plastic gears out of a drawer, and he showed, "Here it is. We grind one of these teeth off on this plastic gear. We put it in the vote counting machine, and then where we put that gear makes a difference in which side gets an extra vote for every 10 that comes through." Openly in the videotape, and they went up into the loft in the attic and filmed a bunch more of that before they got suspicious and they had to skedaddle out of there with their cameras. I saw those things while I was doing this research back then. I bring this out, Madam Speaker, because just because this wasn't a particularly close election in November of 2008 doesn't mean that we shouldn't be alarmed about the corruption of our election process. 537 votes made the difference in Florida, and Florida made the difference on who would be the next leader in the free world, Madam Speaker. And those 537 votes could easily be blended through the more than 400,000 fraudulent registration forms that ACORN has admitted to turning in that corrupted our voter registration rolls and opened the door for the corruption of our election process. Now, I've discussed the Community Reinvestment Act, and now I've discussed the election voter registration fraud process. And these are the get out the vote people for Democrats. Please don't forget. And if we do forget, I should put another fact out. President Obama, as a candidate for president, then Senator Obama, hired ACORN to get out the vote and wrote the check to one of their subsidiary corporations for over $800,000. There's 3 ways the president is tied, more than 3 ways the president is tied to ACORN. One is as their attorney. One is as an employee of Project Vote, heading up Project Vote in Chicago, receiving paychecks, ACORN through Project Vote into President Obama. One is hiring, the third one is hiring ACORN to get out the vote. There are rumors that donor lists got circulated back and forth. I haven't been able to chase that down. The fourth component is the White House has hired ACORN to participate in the census. Now, over 400,000 fraudulent registrations turned in, admitted by ACORN. I suspect significantly more. I've never met someone who admitted to such wrongdoing and admitted to it in the full magnitude of their wrongdoing. They always try to minimize. So at least 400,000. And now the president, who has worked for ACORN in 2 capacities hired ACORN in at least one capacity, now hires ACORN in another capacity as President of the United States to help with the census. To help with the census, to help count the people of the United States. Now, if you want to direct what goes on in America, if you want the power of this country, there are two ways. Through the ballot box and influence the elections so you get your people in these seats here and in the seats in the Senate and in the White House, where there's tremendous power. That's one component. Another component is through the United States Census. What does it do? Well, the Constitution requires us to count the people every 10 years. Count the people, not by formula, not by some magic formula, but actually count the people. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of people out there to do it, to actually count them. But once the people are counted, it affects two big things. One is the redistricting process, where new lines get drawn on the maps of all the states of the Union. And those maps are drawn and approved by the state legislatures. And some of them, it's very, very partisan, and they decide how they expand the number of Democrat or Republican seats that whoever happens to be in charge. In my state, I'm really fortunate because it's far less partisan than it is in any other state that I know of. But that sets that determines in a large way who will be in the majorities in the state legislatures after the next elections. Some seats will be lost and some seats will be won because of the lines that are drawn that are the result of the census that's taking place in 2010. Not only does it make a difference in who's in the majority in the state legislatures in every state, the bicameral, with the exception of Nebraska, which is unicameral, but also it makes a difference in the congressional districts, these 435 districts that are seated here in this Congress, Madam Speaker. And when those lines are changed, it makes a difference on sometimes who comes to this Congress. It makes a difference on whether a few more Republicans get elected or a few more Democrats get elected. And if you can stack the count in certain areas, you can expand the number of seats and make a difference on who holds the gavel here behind me, Madam Speaker. If we just look at the count of illegals in America, there's a study done by a reputable organization, Dr. Steve Camarata, as I recall, that comes to a conclusion that there are between 9 and 11 congressional seats in America. This is an election or two ago, so that probably shifts, the analysis shifts now. But it was between 9 and 11 seats in America that are shifted because we count illegals along with legals for purposes of apportionment. It takes, in my opinion, a constitutional amendment to fix that. But someone like Maxine Waters in California will require perhaps 50,000 votes to get reelected to Congress because, I suspect, she doesn't have as many legal Americans there and a lower percentage of citizens and certainly a lower incidence of people voting. My particular seat, it'll take about 120,000 votes to be elected or reelected to the 5th District of Iowa because we have a high percentage of citizens and a low percentage of illegals. The census makes a difference. And if the census is an accurate count, then we can draw better lines. If the census is an inaccurate count, then the lines will be drawn to favor the partisan interests of the people that produce the inaccurate count. Now, if I were going to look across the entire United States of America and try to come up with entities that had the wherewithal to significantly provide the manpower for this census and who had the most ability to corrupt the process, number one on my list of alarm would be ACORN and all of their affiliates, for all these reasons that I've said. But how can anyone expect to get a legitimate count on the census from the very people that have produced the illegitimate voter registration forms? And yet, President Obama, his administration, has contracted with ACORN to assist with the census. Excuse me.